I used to believe love could conquer anything, even blood ties. I told myself that if I had him, I didn't need anyone else. Not my mother's voice, not my father's warnings, not the home I grew up in. So I chose him. I walked away from the people who raised me, from the family who begged me to see the truth. And for a while I thought I'd won. But love wasn't my salvation. It was my destruction. I remember the first time I saw him. It was one of those moments that should have been ordinary, forgettable. Just another passing day in a life that seemed steady and predictable. My world at that time was built around my family. We weren't perfect, no family is, but we were close, rooted in rituals that gave me comfort. Sunday dinners, where my mother's laughter filled the kitchen as she cooked, and my father's quiet strength anchored us all. My siblings and I had our rivalries, but underneath them was loyalty. Or at least that's what I thought. And then he appeared. He wasn't from my world. That was the first thing I noticed. My life had been simple, predictable, his was not. He carried himself with a confidence that made people turn their heads. His eyes held stories he never told, and his smile was like a secret you desperately wanted to earn. I was drawn to him the way fire pulls oxygen. My heart didn't ask questions. It just ran toward him. I told myself it was fate. Destiny. Whatever word people use when they want to justify the irrational. My family saw it differently. Be careful, my father warned. His tone was calm but firm, the kind of voice that meant he wasn't speaking lightly. Not everyone who looks strong is safe. Not everyone who offers love knows how to give it. But I didn't listen. Couldn't. Every time he held my hand, every time he whispered that I was different, that I was the only one who ever truly saw him, I felt like I had stepped into a story that was bigger than myself. He made me believe I was special. My family's love felt ordinary. His love felt like lightning. Still there were cracks. At first I didn't notice them. He hated when I canceled plans for family events. Why do they need you all the time? He'd ask, his smile sharp. Why can't it just be us? I thought it was sweet, even flattering, that he wanted me to himself. I didn't see the warning in his words. I brushed off the unease that flickered in my chest when my mother frowned at him across the dinner table, when my siblings whispered about how different I'd become. Love changes people, I told myself. And I believed it. But late at night, when I lay awake listening to his breathing beside me, I sometimes wondered if I was the one being changed, or the one being erased. The bond between us grew fast, too fast. We skipped the stages normal couples go through. It was as if we were racing against something invisible. He said he couldn't imagine life without me, that he needed me more than I could ever understand. Those words wrapped around my heart like a chain. I thought it was devotion. In truth, it was possession. And slowly, without realizing it, I started to drift. I skipped more family dinners. I ignored more phone calls. The home that once grounded me began to feel like a place I no longer belonged. Every argument with my mother ended with me running back to him, seeking his arms, his validation, his promises that love was all we needed. Looking back now, I see the pattern. The way he isolated me, not with force, but with carefully chosen words. But at the time I was blind. I thought I was making choices freely. In reality, I was already surrendering piece by piece. There was one night, though, that should have opened my eyes. My sister, the one who always spoke her mind, pulled me aside after a family gathering. "You're disappearing," she said quietly, her eyes searching mine. "Every time I look at you, I see less of the girl I grew up with and more of him. Do you even notice?" I laughed it off, told her she was being dramatic. But her words stayed with me. I didn't want to admit it, but when I looked in the mirror later that night, I saw it too. My smile wasn't my own anymore, it was his. My choices weren't mine, they were his. Still, I convinced myself it was love. Because admitting the truth, admitting that I was losing myself, meant admitting my family had been right all along. And I wasn't ready to face that. That was the beginning of the divide. Every time my family questioned him, I defended him harder. Every time they warned me, I clung to him tighter. My love became rebellion. and my rebellion became distance. I thought I was proving them wrong. I didn't realize I was walking straight into the storm. And as the months passed, the tension between my family and me became unbearable. Every dinner turned into an argument. Every call from my mother ended in tears. My father stopped trying to reason with me, and that silence cut deeper than any words could have. It was as if I was living two lives, one where I was adored and worshipped by him, and another where I was alienated and resented by the people who had always loved me. And deep down I knew something had to break. The tension only grew from there. My family was slipping away from me, and instead of holding tighter, I pushed them further. Every warning sounded like judgment, every concern felt like an attack. And the more they tried to protect me, the more I ran to him. He made it so easy. Whenever my mother called me crying, begging me to listen, he would hold me afterward and whisper, "They don't understand us. They never will. But you and I, we're different. We're stronger than them." I believed him. I wanted to believe him. Because if I admitted my family's words might hold truth, then everything I'd sacrificed for him would crumble. And I couldn't bear the thought of that. Our relationship became my shield. Every time my father's silence weighed heavy on me, every time my sister rolled her eyes or shook her head, I told myself it didn't matter. 'Cause I had him. Because love was enough. Because he was worth everything. But love, or at least what I thought was love, can be blinding. I started making choices that weren't really mine. First, they were small. He'd suggest I wear something different. "That color doesn't suit you," he'd say lightly, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Or he'd insist on picking the restaurant when we went out. "Trust me, you'll like it," he'd add, brushing away my hesitation. And I let him. 'Cause I thought it was harmless. 'Cause I thought it was care. But over time those choices grew larger. He didn't like my friends, so I saw them less. He didn't like my job, so I left it. He said my family drained me, so I stopped visiting. Little by little, my world shrank, until it was only him. And still, called it love. My mother's eyes told a different story. Every time she saw me, she looked as though she wanted to reach out and pull me back into her arms, but didn't know how. One evening when I finally agreed to visit, she sat me down in the kitchen. The same kitchen where I'd spent countless nights laughing, cooking, feeling safe. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the ache behind it. "Do you know what you're giving up?" she asked softly. I shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "Everything we taught you," she whispered. "Everything we gave you. For a man who—" She trailed off, shaking her head, as if the words were too painful to finish. I snapped back, defensive. "Why can't you just be happy for me? Why does it always have to be about what you want?" The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting could have been. My mother turned away, and I hated the hurt on her face. But I hated even more the part of me that wondered if she was right. The more my family pulled back, the more I clung to him. It felt like proof that he was my only safe place. He reminded me constantly that we were against the world together. "It's us or them," he'd say. "You have to choose." And I did. Chose him. Over and over again. But late at night, when he slept and I lay awake staring at the ceiling, doubts began to creep in. Little moments replayed in my mind. His sharp tone when I questioned him, the way his hand tightened on mine just a little too hard, the way he dismissed every person who had ever mattered to me. And then there were the secrets. First, they were small. He'd leave the room to take calls. He'd change the subject when I asked about his past. He told stories that didn't always add up, but when I pressed, he'd smile and kiss me and say, "You worry too much." I convinced myself it was nothing. But deep down I felt it, that crack in the foundation widening slowly, threatening to split everything apart. The breaking point came during a family gathering I almost didn't attend. My sister begged me to show up, said she hadn't seen me in weeks. Against his wishes, I went. It should have been a simple dinner. But nothing about it felt simple anymore. The table that once held laughter now carried tension so thick it was hard to breathe. At one point, my brother leaned across the table and said quietly, "He's changing you. And not for the better." I wanted to scream, to deny it, to protect him. But when I opened my mouth, nothing came out. My silence said more than words ever could. And when I left that night, walking out of my childhood home, I knew something had shifted. My family wasn't just skeptical anymore. They were broken. And though I wouldn't admit it then, so was I. That was the night I realized I was living on borrowed time. The love I had chosen, the love I had sacrificed everything for, wasn't what it seemed. Something was going to break. And when it did, I would lose more than I ever imagined. It's strange how love can feel like both a lifeline and a noose. At first, he was the reason I smiled in the morning, the reason I felt alive again after years of routine. But slowly, without me even noticing, he became the reason I couldn't breathe without asking permission. And yet I still called it love. The distance between me and my family grew wider with each passing month. Birthdays went uncelebrated. Holidays passed without my presence. When my sister texted me long messages about missing me, I read them but didn't respond. It wasn't that I didn't care. It was that caring came with guilt, and guilt came with fights. And I was tired of fighting. So I stayed in his world. A world he crafted carefully, brick by brick, until it became all I knew. At first I thought it was sweet. How much he wanted me around, how jealous he became when I talked to anyone else. He said it was passion, proof that I mattered more than anything. But passion shouldn't feel like possession. I didn't know that yet. He began deciding when I should see him, how long, and under what conditions. If I wanted a night to myself, he'd guilt me. So you'd rather be alone than with me? After everything I give you. And the way he said it, it made me feel ungrateful, even cruel. So I stopped asking for space. And soon I stopped wanting it. Because needing him, being needed by him, felt easier than fighting back. There were still good days, of course. Days when we'd drive for hours with no destination. Just his hand on mine and music in the background. Days when he'd surprise me with flowers, or kiss my forehead like I was the only person in the world worth loving. Those moments kept me hooked. Convinced me that whatever darkness I felt was just in my head. But those good days always came after the storms. As if the sweetness was a reward for surviving the bitterness. And the storms, they grew louder. One evening I found myself at my parents' house again. He didn't want me to go, but I insisted. It had been too long. When I arrived, my father greeted me at the door. His face a mixture of relief and sadness. We sat together in the living room, the old clock ticking on the wall. My mother joined us, quiet but sharp-eyed, watching every expression on my face. Finally she asked, "Are you happy?" Froze. The truth stuck in my throat. So I gave the answer I always did. "Yes, Mom. I'm happy." But the way she looked at me told me she didn't believe a word of it. "Love shouldn't make you smaller," she whispered. "It should make you more." Her words cut deeper than I expected. And when I left that night, her voice followed me home, echoing in my mind. That's when I began noticing things I had ignored before. The way his temper flared so quickly. Over small, meaningless details. The way he always had to be right, even in trivial arguments. The way his compliments always had a hidden blade. "You look beautiful when you try. You're smart but too naive sometimes." And the worst part, I began believing him. The isolation became complete. I didn't realize it until one night when I scrolled through my phone and saw dozens of unread messages. Friends I hadn't spoken to in months, cousins I used to laugh with, my mother's texts left unopened. I wanted to reply. I wanted to tell them I missed them too. But I didn't. Because I knew he'd see and he'd ask questions. And I couldn't handle another fight. So instead I told myself I didn't need them. That as long as I had him I was enough. But even in that silence, the cracks kept widening. One night he came home late, smelling of perfume that wasn't mine. I asked about it, nervously, carefully. He laughed. "You're imagining things. Don't start becoming paranoid." My heart wanted to believe him. My mind knew better. And yet, I chose to believe him. Because if I admitted otherwise, it would mean my sacrifices had been for nothing. It would mean my family had been right all along. But deep down I knew something was breaking. And when it shattered, it wouldn't just be me who paid the price. The nights grew longer, the doubts louder. I lay awake wondering, had I traded love for a cage? And if I had, was there still a way out? The answer was coming. And I wasn't ready for how devastating it would be. Time has a way of slipping when you're trapped inside someone else's world. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months. And before I knew it, a year had passed since I last sat down at a family dinner table. It should have hurt me more than it did. But he had a way of numbing me, keeping me just content enough to ignore the gnawing ache of everything I'd left behind. Still, there were cracks I couldn't ignore anymore. He began to monitor me more closely. My phone, my emails, even the way I dressed. If I wore something too revealing, he'd raise an eyebrow and ask, "Who are you trying to impress?" If I wore something too plain, he'd sneer, "Don't you care how you look for me anymore?" No matter what I did, it wasn't enough. But whenever I tried to push back, his voice would soften. His arms would wrap around me. "I just love you too much. I can't bear the thought of losing you." And for a little while, that was enough to quiet the alarms ringing in my head. But not for long. The isolation grew heavier. Friends stopped calling. My family's messages became shorter, colder. My mother's words the last time I saw her haunted me. "Love shouldn't make you smaller." And smaller was exactly what I was becoming. I used to laugh easily. I used to speak without fear. But now every word felt weighed, measured, judged. Even silence wasn't safe, because silence could be interpreted as rejection. I lived in a state of constant anticipation, waiting for the next storm, the next fight, the next sudden mood shift. It was exhausting, but it was also addictive. Because when he wanted to, he could make me feel like the most cherished person in the world. And those moments, they were like oxygen. One evening, I finally broke and drove to my parents' house unannounced. When my mother opened the door, her eyes filled with tears. She hugged me like she thought I might disappear if she let go. At the table, they asked me simple questions. Questions that felt impossibly heavy. "How are you? Do you feel safe? Do you still recognize yourself?" I wanted to answer. I wanted to tell them everything. The fear, the loneliness, the way I felt trapped. But I couldn't. Because admitting the truth meant admitting I had chosen this path. That I had traded them for him. So instead I smiled weakly and said, "I'm fine." "Really?" My father just sighed. My mother shook her head. And then she said something I'll never forget. "One day, you're going to wake up and realize he's taken everything from you. And when that day comes, I just hope it's not too late to come home." Her words settled over me like a shadow I couldn't escape. When I returned to him that night, he was furious. He accused me of lying, of sneaking behind his back. "Why do you need them when you have me?" he shouted. His voice echoed in the small apartment, sharp and venomous. For the first time I shouted back. "Because they're my family. Because I miss them." The silence that followed was worse than the fight itself. He didn't speak to me for 2 days. Not a word. Not a glance. He punished me with absence, and I crumbled beneath it. By the 3rd day, I was the one apologizing, begging, promising never to do it again. And he smiled, slow, triumphant. That smile told me everything. He knew he had won. Looking back, I think that was the moment I truly began to lose myself. I told myself I was staying because I loved him. Because love was worth sacrifice. But deep down I knew it was fear. Fear of what I'd face if I left him. Fear of admitting my family had been right. Fear of starting over, broken and ashamed. So I stayed. And with every day that passed, the cage closed tighter around me. But cages don't stay hidden forever. Eventually someone notices the bars. And in my case, it wasn't my parents or my friends, or even me who forced the truth to the surface. It was him. Because soon the mask he wore, the charm, the sweetness, the tenderness, it began to slip. And what was underneath was something far darker than I ever imagined. That's when the story shifted. That's when the betrayal revealed itself. And that's when I learned the true cost of choosing him over my family. Life with him became a rhythm of extremes. One moment, he was tender, attentive, the man I had once fallen so recklessly for. The next, he was cold, distant, even cruel, testing how far he could push before I broke. I adapted. I learned to read the smallest changes in his tone, the tightness in his jaw, the flicker of his eyes. I tiptoed around moods like landmines, desperate to keep the peace, desperate to keep him. But there's a dangerous kind of silence that settles when love turns into survival. I didn't laugh as much anymore. I didn't call anyone, not even my sister, who used to be my best friend. My world shrank until it was only him. And still, he found ways to make that world feel smaller. He convinced me to quit my job, saying, "Why should you waste time working when I can take care of you?" First, it sounded romantic. But the truth, it left me with nothing. No income, no independence, no escape. The cage was tightening. And yet, there were moments when I convinced myself it was worth it. Like the night he surprised me with flowers and whispered, "You're my everything. I can't breathe without you." Or when he held me close and told me, "We don't need anyone else. It's you and me against the world." Those words fed something deep inside me, the part that wanted to believe love could justify all the pain. But there was always a shadow behind them. Because if love really was enough, why did it feel like I was disappearing? My family never stopped trying, though. They sent letters, voicemails, even showed up outside my apartment once. I remember watching from behind the curtain as my mother stood on the sidewalk, clutching a photo of me as a child. She didn't ring the bell. She just stood there, looking up at the window where she thought I might be. I wanted to run down. I wanted to throw the door open and fall into her arms. But I didn't. Because when I glanced behind me, he was standing there watching. His voice was calm, almost tender. "If you walk out that door, don't bother coming back." And so I froze. I let my mother stand there until the light faded and she finally walked away. The image of her retreating figure still burns in my mind. It was after that night that I started to realize something dangerous. He didn't just want me to love him. He wanted me to belong to him. There's a difference. Love is shared. Belonging is owned. And I was quickly becoming property. One evening, I found myself staring at an old photo album I had hidden in the back of my closet. Pictures of family vacations, birthdays, my sister and I laughing until our stomachs hurt. I flipped the pages slowly, and with each turn, I felt more and more like a stranger looking into a life that no longer belonged to me. That's when he walked in. He didn't say a word at first, just stood there watching me. Then he picked up the album, flipped it shut and said, "You don't need this anymore." And just like that he tossed it into the trash. I wanted to scream, fight, to dive after those pages of my life. But I didn't. I just sat there, silent. Because part of me knew the truth. I had already thrown all of that away the moment I chose him over them. Still, in that silence, something inside me shifted. A small, quiet seed of doubt. A voice that whispered, "This isn't love. This is control. And one day, it's going to destroy you." But I shoved that voice down, buried it under fear and denial. I told myself it was too late. That I had burned too many bridges, hurt too many people, made too many choices I couldn't undo. So I stayed. Even when my heart screamed at me to run, I stayed. But fate has a cruel way of forcing the truth into the light. Because what came next wasn't just another fight, another storm, another night of apologies and promises. What came next was betrayal. The kind that rips the blindfold from your eyes. The kind that leaves scars so deep, you'll never look at love the same way again. And when that moment arrived, I finally understood what my mother meant when she said, "Love shouldn't make you smaller." Because soon I wouldn't just lose myself. I would lose everything. I thought I had given up everything for him. My family, my friends, my independence. What else could he possibly take from me? I didn't know then that he was already taking more. It started with whispers I wasn't meant to hear. Phone call late at night. His voice low, almost hushed, as he slipped into the other room. At first I brushed it off. Everyone needs privacy sometimes, right? But then the laughter. Not just laughter. That kind of laughter. The intimate, playful tone I used to hear when he first courted me. Only now it wasn't for me. My chest tightened. My palms turned cold. I told myself I was imagining it. That stress was making me paranoid. But when he came back into the room, his smile felt different. Forced. His eyes darted away too quickly when I asked, "Who was that?" "Just business," he said. But something in me didn't believe it. Days turned into weeks. And the signs grew louder. Receipts I found crumpled in his pockets from restaurants I'd never been to. Messages on his phone, half deleted but not carefully enough. A strand of hair on his jacket, long and golden. Nothing like mine. It was like living with a stranger who wore his face. And yet, I clung to denial. Because admitting the truth meant admitting I had given up my family for a man who was never truly mine. It meant my mother's warnings weren't just overprotective ramblings. They were prophecies. I wasn't ready to face that. Not yet. But the truth has a way of clawing its way out. One night I followed him. He said he was meeting a client. Something in me screamed not to believe him, and before I knew it, I was slipping on my coat, trailing him through the city streets like a ghost. My hands trembled as I kept my distance, my heart pounding in my throat. He walked with purpose. His shoulders relaxed in a way they never were around me anymore. And then, he stopped. Outside a dimly lit cafe. Where she was waiting. She rose from the table the second she saw him, her smile wide, her arms open. He pulled her close, kissed her cheek with a tenderness that broke something inside me. And in that moment the denial shattered. It wasn't a suspicion anymore. It wasn't paranoia. It was betrayal. I wanted to storm in, to scream, to demand answers. But I didn't. I stayed frozen outside the window, watching them laugh, watching them touch. I wanted to memorize the scene, not because I was weak, but because I knew this moment would become the fire that forged my revenge. When he came home later that night, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't mine, he kissed my forehead and said, "I'm exhausted. Let's talk tomorrow." And for the first time I didn't argue. I didn't question him. I just smiled and tucked the truth away like a weapon. Because something had awakened inside me that night. No longer was I the girl who begged for his love. No longer was I the fool who thought love justified sacrifice. Now I was a woman with a secret. A woman with a plan. But revenge is a dangerous seed. It doesn't bloom overnight. It festers, it grows in the dark, it spreads roots into every thought. The first night, I lay awake beside him, listening to his steady breathing, imagining what it would feel like to expose him. To ruin him the way he had ruined me. The second night I started to imagine details, scenarios where he lost everything. His pride, his comfort, his lies. And by the third night, I wasn't imagining anymore. I was planning. Still, the danger of it loomed heavy in my chest. Because if I made one wrong move, if he ever suspected I knew, I would lose the little control I still had left. And worse, no one could protect me now. My family was gone. I had burned those bridges myself. If he turned against me, I would be alone in the wreckage. The risk was terrifying. But so was doing nothing. Because the longer I stayed, the more I could feel him draining me. Stealing not just my trust but my very sense of self. And I refused to let him win. So I smiled at him over breakfast. I laughed at his jokes. I kissed him goodnight. But inside I was sharpening the knife of patience, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Because if love had cost me my whole world, then revenge was the only thing left I could claim as mine. And that moment was coming faster than he could ever imagine. The days after I discovered the truth felt like drowning. I woke up every morning with his arm draped across me, And instead of warmth, all I felt was the weight of betrayal. Every kiss, every word, every glance, it was all contaminated now. And yet I played the part. Smiled. He nodded. I let him believe I was blind. But inside I was unraveling. I started questioning everything. When had it begun? Was it during those late nights at the office? Had he ever truly loved me, or was I just convenient? The paranoia was a storm I couldn't control. I replayed every memory, every intimate moment, dissecting it for lies. And the worst part, the pieces didn't fit anymore. It was like realizing the life I thought I had lived wasn't real at all. It was all an illusion. One night, unable to hold it in, I whispered to myself in the dark, "You lied to me." The words felt like poison on my tongue. He stirred beside me, his breathing shifting, but he didn't wake. If he had, I don't know what I would have done. The rage was building brick by brick inside my chest. And rage, I realized, could be useful. Because while grief paralyzes, rage moves you, drives you to act. That's when I began to think, not just about revenge but about how to execute it. First, it was messy. My thoughts were wild, chaotic. I imagined throwing his clothes out the window, screaming his betrayal in the middle of the street. But those were childish fantasies. Temporary satisfaction. Well, if I was going to destroy him, it had to be precise, sharp, undeniable, and most importantly, it had to cost him everything. So I began to watch him, not with the eyes of a lover, but with the cold calculation of someone studying prey. His routines, his weaknesses, his secrets. I noticed how his phone never left his side anymore, how he locked it with a new password, how he grew restless whenever I lingered too close while he was texting. Confirmed everything. But I also noticed something else. Patterns. He always called her on Tuesday nights after work. He always left on Friday evenings under the guise of late meetings. And he always came back lighter, happier, only to grow tense again once he stepped through our door. It was almost laughable, how predictable betrayal becomes once you see it for what it is. But I wasn't just watching him. I started watching her. First, it was unintentional. A glimpse of her reflection in a cafe window, a quick glance at her profile picture when he carelessly left his phone face up. But soon it became deliberate. I learned her name, her workplace, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she laughed. And with every detail, my hatred grew sharper. Not just for her but for him, for making me sacrifice everything only to turn me into this. But here's the thing about revenge. It doesn't exist in isolation. Carries risk, danger, consequences that ripple far beyond what you can control. And the first taste of that risk came sooner than I expected. One evening I followed him again. This time not to confirm my suspicions but to test myself, to see if I was ready to take the next step. I trailed him to her apartment building, hiding in the shadows like some desperate stranger. And when he disappeared inside, I stayed. For hours I stood across the street, staring at the glowing windows, imagining what was happening inside. Intimacy, laughter, the betrayal in flesh and bone. And the longer I stood there, the darker my thoughts became. What if someone saw me? What if he caught me? What if she did? The thought alone made my stomach clench. Because if either of them realized I knew, my control would vanish. I would lose the advantage. And without that, had nothing. I left that night shaken, but also more determined. Because now I knew, if I was going to do this, I had to be careful. Calculated. Every move had to be invisible, at least until it was too late for him to fight back. The next morning, over coffee, he smiled at me and asked if I wanted to go away with him for the weekend. The audacity of it nearly made me laugh out loud. I pictured him planning a little getaway with me, while secretly slipping into her bed the night before. Sure, I said, my voice calm, steady. But inside I was screaming. Because in that moment, I knew something had changed in me forever. I wasn't just hurt. I wasn't just betrayed. I was ready. And for the first time I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like the one holding the match, standing in front of a house soaked in gasoline. It was only a matter of time before I lit it. But if someone found out, if he ever caught the fire in my eyes, everything would fall apart before it even began. That was the danger I carried now. And yet, I couldn't stop. Because the seed of revenge wasn't just planted anymore. It was growing. And it was hungry. The decision to act didn't come with fireworks or thunder. It came quietly, like a whisper in the back of my mind that refused to leave. One morning while he showered, I stood in our kitchen staring at his phone left on the counter. Vibrated once. Her name lit up the screen. For a moment my pulse roared so loud I thought I'd collapse. It was right there. The proof. The doorway into their world. And yet I didn't touch it. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew better. If I broke into his phone too soon, he would know. And if he knew, I'd lose everything. My leverage, my control, my plan. So instead, I let it ring. I let him believe I was still blind. But that single moment, it planted something else in me, confidence. I didn't need to act reckless. I needed to be patient. I needed to make him think I was still the loving, devoted partner, while quietly building the walls of his cage around him. That night I did something small, something almost invisible. I slipped into his wallet while he slept, memorizing the numbers on his corporate credit card. It wasn't theft. Not yet. It was information. Information I knew would eventually become my weapon. The first real strike, though, came a week later. Called his office. Pretended to be a client. I asked questions about his schedule, his late-night meetings. And with every vague, fumbling answer from his assistant, I confirmed what I already knew. He was lying not just to me, but to them too. Because you see, betrayal rarely exists in isolation. When someone cheats in love, they often cheat in life. And I was going to use that against him. But the deeper I went, the more dangerous it became. One evening I followed him again. But this time, instead of hiding in the shadows, I walked into the same bar where he sat with her. My heart nearly tore through my chest. I kept my distance, slipping into the corner booth, my hair covering most of my face. From there I watched them. His hand on hers, their laughter spilling into the dim air like a knife twisting inside me. And for a brief moment I almost broke. The urge to scream, to march across that floor and expose him then and there, was overwhelming. But I didn't. Because that would have been too easy for him. And I wanted him to suffer slowly, piece by piece, the way I had. I left the bar before he noticed me. But as I walked out, something shifted in me. I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. I had just stood in the same room as them, watched his betrayal with my own eyes, and he hadn't even sensed it. That meant I was stronger than he was. Smarter. Colder. And it gave me the courage to do something far bolder. The next morning, while he was in the shower again, I slipped into his briefcase. Nestled between papers was a small stack of contracts, business deals worth more than I had ever imagined. I photographed every single page. And in that moment, I crossed a line I could never return from. Because now, I wasn't just his betrayed partner. I was his silent executioner, holding pieces of his professional life in my hands. But secrets like that, they burn. They weigh heavy. And soon, I found myself testing how far I could push him without him noticing. I started leaving little cracks in my mask. A cold glance across the dinner table. A sharp question disguised as a joke. Moments where my silence lingered just a little too long. He noticed. I could see it in his eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked one night, his voice hesitant. And I smiled at him, sweet, soft, poisonous. "I'm fine." It was the biggest lie I'd ever told. But it worked. He believed me. That's when I knew I was ready for the first real move. Something subtle. Something small. Something that would unsettle him just enough to feel a chill down his spine, without ever suspecting it was me. So I sent her a message. From an anonymous account. 4 simple words. "Does he lie to you?" I didn't stay to see if she replied. That wasn't the point. The point was the seed. The doubt. Paranoia. The same poison he had forced into my veins, now dripping into theirs. That night when he came home, I studied him carefully. He looked tired. Distracted. His phone buzzed more than usual. And I smiled to myself in the mirror. Because I knew the ripples had begun. But with every move I made, the danger grew sharper. If he ever traced it back to me, if he ever suspected I was behind the cracks forming in his perfect little double life, then it wouldn't just be my revenge at risk. It would be me. My safety. My future. The thought terrified me. But it also thrilled me. Because danger, I realized, is what makes revenge intoxicating. And I wasn't just playing anymore. I was hunting. The first crack was small. Just a whispered question sent to her inbox. But cracks, if you press hard enough, always spread. And I pressed. First, it was little things. I began to move his papers. Rearrange them. Take one out of order and slip it back days later. I wanted him to feel it. The creeping unease of losing control. One evening, he tore through his briefcase in frustration, muttering curses under his breath. I stood at the doorway, sipping my tea, watching him fall apart over something I had done. And for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of power. But power is addictive. It wasn't enough to unsettle him. I wanted to break him. So I reached for the photographs. The contracts I'd stolen from his briefcase. And I made a choice. I leaked them. Not to the press. Not to his company directly. No, that would have been too obvious. Instead, I slipped them anonymously to one of his competitors. Just enough to raise suspicion. Just enough to make his bosses wonder if he was sloppy. Or worse, disloyal. The fallout came quickly. One morning, I woke to him pacing the living room. Phone pressed to his ear, voice sharp with panic. What do you mean it's out there? No, I didn't. I would never. His face was pale. His hands shook. And all I could think was, good. Now you know what it feels like. But my revenge wasn't without risk. Because as I watched him unravel, I realized something I hadn't before. If his company traced it back to him, his career would collapse. And if his career collapsed, so would the lifestyle I lived in. The house, car, the security. I wasn't just destroying him. I was destroying myself too. But by then, it was too late to stop. Meanwhile, the message I had sent to her had begun to work its poison. He grew more distracted, more paranoid, checking his phone constantly, leaving the room to answer calls. At dinner one night, his voice cracked as he snapped at me over nothing, and I tilted my head, watching him the way one studies a drowning man. "Are you sure you're okay?" I asked softly, echoing the same lie I had told him weeks ago. His jaw tightened. He didn't answer. And in that silence I knew. The walls were closing in on him. But with paranoia comes suspicion. And soon I began to feel his eyes on me. Late at night, when he thought I was asleep, I'd sense him watching me, studying me, as if some part of him knew I wasn't as innocent as I seemed. One morning, he asked a question that nearly froze my blood. "You'd tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you?" I looked up from my coffee. Smile. Of course. But my hand trembled around the mug. Because for the first time I realized just how thin the line was between my mask and exposure. And then, the danger turned real. A letter arrived in the mail. No return address. Just a single sheet of paper. On it were 4 words, typed in cold black ink. "He will find out." My breath caught. I scanned the street outside, half expecting someone to be watching. Was it her? Was it his company? Or was it him testing me? For the first time, the fear clawed deeper than the anger. Because revenge wasn't just about him anymore. Someone else knew. And if they exposed me, everything would come crashing down. But instead of stopping, I doubled down. Because fear, when mixed with rage, doesn't weaken you, sharpens you. And so, I devised something far more dangerous. A strike that wouldn't just make him paranoid. It would tear apart everything he had built. I decided to take her away from him. Not physically, Emotionally, I began sending her more messages. Anonymous, subtle, little truths only someone close to him could know. He told you he was working late last Tuesday, didn't he? Ask him about the deal in Chicago. You don't really think you're the only one, do you? I painted him as a liar not just to me, but to her. And soon I could see the effect in his face. The late-night calls became arguments. The texts turned frantic. He started drinking more, snapping faster. Piece by piece, I was pulling the two of them apart. And watching him suffer through it gave me a sick kind of joy. But what I didn't realize then was that the more I pulled, the more dangerous it became. Because a man like him, he wasn't just going to crumble quietly. He was going to fight. And when he did, he'd turn his suspicion toward the one person closest to him, me. And I'll never forget the night it finally happened. He came home late, reeking of whiskey, eyes red, jaw tight. He dropped his keys on the counter and stared at me for a long, unbearable silence. Then he asked, voice low and razor-sharp, "Why does it feel like you know more than you should?" The room froze. My heart thundered. But I met his gaze and forced a smile. "Because I'm your partner. I know you." He studied me for a long time. And then, slowly, he turned away. But I knew. He knew. He was starting to suspect. And suspicion, once it begins, is a fire you can't put out. That was the moment I realized I couldn't stop now. I couldn't go back. I couldn't hesitate. If I didn't finish what I started, if I didn't destroy him first, then he would destroy me. And so, my revenge stopped being a plan. It became survival. Started with silence. The kind of silence that presses against your skin, makes your chest heavy, makes the air itself feel poisonous. He hadn't spoken to me in 2 days. Not really. Just clipped responses, hollow nods, a cold distance that felt like punishment. I knew what was coming. I'd been waiting for it. The night it happened, I was sitting at the dining table, pretending to read. The clock ticked. My tea went cold. And then I heard it. The sound of his key in the lock. Low. Deliberate. The door creaked open. He stepped inside, his shirt wrinkled, his tie loose, his eyes bloodshot. But it wasn't the exhaustion that scared me. It was the look. The way his eyes didn't search the room. They searched me. He dropped his briefcase onto the floor. The thud made me flinch. Then he said it. Words that carved the air in half. "Who else knows?" Froze. My throat went dry. "What?" "Don't play games with me." His voice was low, dangerous. "Who else knows what you've been doing?" My pulse roared in my ears. So he knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. I closed my book carefully, set it on the table, and lifted my chin. "I don't know what you're talking about." His laugh was sharp, bitter. He stepped closer. "Don't lie to me. I've seen the messages. The leaks. Someone's been feeding her things. Things only you could know. Or, the mistress." So he'd put it together. For a moment I considered denying it again. But then I saw something in his eyes. Not rage. Not even betrayal. Fear. And I realized I had the upper hand. So I leaned back in my chair, let a smile curve across my lips. "Maybe she just got tired of your lies. Did you ever think of that?" His jaw clenched. His fists curled. "Don't push me." But I was done being afraid. I wanted him to break. So I whispered, "She knows more than you think. And it's only the beginning." The silence that followed was suffocating. His breathing grew ragged, his face flushed red. Then he slammed his fist against the table, making the book jump. "Why?" he roared. "Why would you do this to me? After everything. After I gave you everything." I stood, slowly, deliberately. And when I spoke, my voice was calm, almost gentle. "You didn't give me everything. You took everything. My family. My life. My trust." His face twisted. He shook his head like a man refusing reality. "You chose me." "I did," I whispered. And it was the worst mistake of my life. The words hung between us, heavy and final. And I knew in that moment we couldn't go back. This wasn't a marriage anymore. It was a battlefield. And one of us was going to lose everything. The room felt smaller. The walls seemed to lean in, trapping us. He stood at the head of the table, chest rising and falling like he'd just run a marathon. I stood across from him, hands trembling, though I forced them behind my back so he wouldn't see. "You ruined me," he hissed. "You think you're clever, don't you? Exposing me to her. To everyone." I tilted my head. "I didn't have to expose you. You exposed yourself. All I did was shine a light." He laughed, sharp, manic. "God, you sound just like them. Your family. Always whispering, always watching, always waiting for me to slip. And you were supposed to be different. You were supposed to be mine." The way he said it, mine, made my skin crawl. Possession disguised as love. "I was never yours," I spat. "Not really. You wanted control, not love." For a heartbeat, he just stared at me. And then he lunged. Not to hit me, but to grab the phone from the table. My phone. He unlocked it with a swipe, his movements desperate, almost frantic. And then his eyes landed on the messages. The ones between me and his mistress. Proof. He scrolled, jaw tightening with every word he read. "She trusted you," he whispered. "She told you things in confidence. And you used her." I stepped closer, voice like ice. "She was never my friend. She was your betrayal. And I warned you, if you ever hurt me, I'd make you feel it tenfold." His face darkened. "You think you've won. You think people will take your side. Look around you, sweetheart. You don't have anyone else. You gave them up. For me." The words hit harder than I wanted to admit. And he knew it. He smirked, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You're alone. And when this blows back, when the truth gets twisted, and it will, you'll have no one left. Not even yourself." I could feel the sting of tears pressing behind my eyes. But I refused to let them fall. Instead, I took a deep breath and whispered the words I'd been saving. "You're wrong. I may not have my family. But I have the truth. And the truth destroys liars." Something in his expression cracked. His confidence wavered. And in that sliver of weakness I struck. I pulled another phone from the drawer, my backup. Unlocked. Already recording. His eyes widened as I held it up. Every word, every threat, every confession he'd just spilled was saved. "You," he stammered, his face draining of color. "You recorded me." "Yes," I said, my voice steady now. "And tomorrow morning, the world will hear exactly who you are." For the first time since I'd known him, he looked powerless. Stripped of his mask, stripped of control. And in that moment I should have felt victorious. But instead, felt hollow. Because this wasn't just his downfall. It was mine too. He staggered back, collapsing into a chair, running his hands through his hair. His voice cracked when he spoke. "You'll regret this. You'll burn with me." I swallowed hard. Maybe he was right. But at least I wouldn't burn alone. The silence after was unbearable. It was the silence of something breaking. Something that could never be repaired. And deep down I knew. This was only the beginning of the end. Morning came like a storm. I hadn't slept. My body ached with tension, my mind replaying every word, every threat from the night before. The recording sat on my phone like a ticking bomb. All I had to do was press send. But once I did, there was no going back. He moved through the house like a shadow, pacing, muttering, drinking coffee that went cold in his hands. He didn't look at me. Not once. Until I stood by the door, phone in hand, ready to leave. "Where are you going?" His voice was hoarse, desperate, almost human. "Don't do this. Please. If you love me at all, don't do this." Froze. Not because I believed him, but because the sound of him begging felt unreal. "I loved you," I said softly. Past tense. And then I walked out. By noon, the recording wasn't just on my phone anymore. It was in her hands. His mistress. Her face went pale as she listened, eyes darting toward the glass door of the cafe we sat in. Every word, his threats, his lies, his confessions, echoed in the air between us. She whispered, "You're destroying him." "No," I said, voice steady. "He destroyed himself. I'm just giving the world the evidence." That night, the fallout began. Her silence shattered into fury. She called him, screamed at him, cursed him for dragging her into his mess. And I knew she wouldn't stop there. People like her never kept secrets. Not when they burned this hot. By morning, the story had spread through whispers, texts, and screenshots. Our circle, his friends, his colleagues, the community we lived in. They all knew. When I walked into the living room, he was already sitting there. TV was off. The bottle of whiskey was nearly empty. His eyes found mine, bloodshot, hollow. "You did this," he said flatly. "You've ruined me." I met his stare. "You ruined us." I just refused to go down quietly. He stood slowly, swaying slightly, then took a step closer. His voice was low, a growl. "You think people are going to believe you? That you're some innocent little victim? Well, they'll see you for what you are. A vindictive, bitter girl who couldn't handle being left." I felt my chest tighten, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I whispered back, "Maybe. But at least I won't be the only one exposed." His laugh was broken, sharp as glass. "You think this is revenge? This is suicide. They'll eat you alive too. Your family will hear. Your name will be dragged through the dirt. You'll have no one." The words hit like knives. Because I knew he wasn't entirely wrong. But still I couldn't stop. I leaned forward, voice like a blade. "Better no one than you." The silence after was suffocating. He looked at me, really looked at me, as if searching for the woman who once loved him. But she was gone. Buried beneath betrayal, lies, and the ashes of the life I gave up for him. And in that silence I pressed send. The recording, the messages, everything. Straight to every person who once admired him, trusted him, believed in him. The vibration of his phone was immediate. Buzz after buzz after buzz. His eyes widened as he realized. His empire, his carefully curated mask, was crumbling in real time. He staggered back, whispering, "No, no, no, no." Then louder, "You'll pay for this." But his voice no longer had the power it once did. It was hollow. Me. A desperate man screaming into a void. And me. I should have felt triumphant. But as I stood there, watching the man I had once chosen over my own blood unravel before my eyes, all I felt was the weight of my own loss. Because even in victory, I was already broken. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one inside. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Message after message, call after call. People he once charmed, respected, manipulated, now turning on him. And I stood in the doorway, silent, as his kingdom fell apart. He threw the phone against the wall, the sound of shattering glass echoing through the room. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he roared. His chest heaved with rage, his hands shaking. "I know exactly what I've done," I replied. "For once, the truth is louder than your lies." He lunged forward, closing the space between us, his face inches from mine. His breath was hot with whiskey, his eyes bloodshot, wild. "You'll regret this. I swear I'll drag you down with me." I didn't flinch. Because fear was gone now, burned out by weeks of betrayal and months of lies. "You already dragged me down," I said coldly. "All I did was stop drowning." For the first time he hesitated. His jaw clenched, but something flickered in his eyes, something like defeat. Then came the pounding at the door. Loud, relentless. We both froze. It wasn't just one knock. It was many. Voices outside, shouting his name, demanding answers. The whispers had traveled faster than I'd imagined. His world wasn't just cracking. It was collapsing. Open up, someone bellowed. We know everything. He stumbled back, panic flashing across his face. He looked at me as though I held the answer to salvation. Please, he whispered, almost choking. Help me fix this. Don't let them take everything from me. His voice, once so powerful, so commanding, was now the voice of a broken man. I shook my head. You wanted control. You wanted secrets. Now you can have the consequences. The door shook under the fists pounding against it. He grabbed my arm suddenly, hard enough to bruise, desperation dripping from every movement. You loved me, he hissed. You gave me everything. You think you can just walk away now? I stared at him, my heart thudding like a war drum. Yes, I whispered. Because loving you was the biggest mistake of my life. I yanked my arm free. The door burst open. Faces flooded the entryway. Friends, neighbors, people who once looked up to him. Phones raised. Voices shouting. It was chaos. Accusations flying, words like liar, cheater, fraud cutting through the air. And in the middle of it all, he stood frozen. The great man. The man I sacrificed my family for. Reduced to nothing more than a cornered animal. He turned to me one last time. And for a moment I thought I saw the man I once loved, the smile that once lit up my world, the charm that once blinded me. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by raw hatred. This isn't over, he spat. I'll ruin you if it's the last thing I do. I felt the eyes of the crowd on me, waiting for my response, waiting to see if I'd shatter under the weight of his threat. Instead, I spoke the last words I would ever say to him. No, it's over. And you ruined yourself. The room erupted in noise. People surged forward, demanding explanations, throwing accusations. I slipped past them, unnoticed, my body trembling with adrenaline. When the door shut behind me, the sound of his empire crashing down faded into the night. And for the first time in years, could breathe. But freedom came at a cost. Because as I walked into the cold night air, one truth struck me harder than anything else. I had nothing left. Not him. Not my family. Not even the version of myself I once recognized. All I had was silence. And scars that no one could see. The night I walked out of his house felt like walking out of a fire. Everything behind me was burning. My love, my loyalty, my sacrifices, and all I carried with me were ashes. At first, I thought I'd feel triumphant. I thought exposing him, watching his lies unravel, would feel like justice. But as I sat alone in my car, the adrenaline faded. The silence grew heavy. And that's when the truth hit me. I had destroyed him. But I had destroyed myself too. Calls came quickly. Not to me but about me. People whispering, speculating. She was the one who brought him down. She knew all along. Maybe she was part of it. My name became tied to his downfall. No matter how far I tried to step away, I was still linked to him. And the deeper I thought about it, the more I realized, I had chosen this. I chose him over my family. Over my mother's voice telling me he wasn't who he seemed. Over my father's quiet disappointment the night I left home. Over the siblings who stopped reaching out because they were tired of watching me self-destruct. And now, I had no one left to call. The first week after it all crumbled was the hardest. I stayed in a cheap rented room, the kind with peeling wallpaper and flickering lights. Every sound made me flinch. Every shadow felt like him coming back for revenge. But worse than the fear was the emptiness. No one to text, "Good morning." No one to share the silence with at night. No one to tell me that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the villain in my own story. One night, I scrolled through my old photos. Smiles frozen in time. Trips we took. Dinners where I thought I was glowing because of love, not realizing it was just the spotlight of his manipulation. And then I saw a picture of my family. A birthday dinner I skipped because he didn't want me around them. They were all there. Laughing, celebrating, candles lit on the cake. And I wasn't in the frame. That picture broke me more than his betrayal ever could. Because in that moment, I saw the truth. He didn't steal my family. He gave them away. Days blurred into weeks. I tried to reach out, sent my mother a message. Just a few words. "I'm sorry. I should have listened." She didn't reply. Not then. Maybe she never would. And I couldn't blame her. Healing wasn't a straight line. Some days I felt strong. Like maybe I had finally escaped his grip. Other days I felt like a ghost. Like the best parts of me had been buried with a love I once thought would save me. People asked me if I regretted it. If I regretted exposing him. If I regretted burning his life down. And the answer was complicated. 'Cause yes, revenge gave me closure. But it also carved a hole in me so deep I wasn't sure I could ever fill it again. The truth. Revenge doesn't give you back what you lost. It doesn't return the years you wasted, or the people you pushed away. It just leaves you standing in the ruins, wondering why victory feels so much like grief. And yet, part of me knew I had no other choice. If I hadn't stopped him, he would have gone on hurting others. He would have destroyed more lives. So maybe my scars had a purpose. Maybe my silence could now serve as a warning. I often walk past places we used to go. The cafe where he first held my hand. The park bench where he promised me forever. The street where I kissed him under the rain, believing it was fate. Now those places feel haunted. Not by him, but by the version of me that believed him. The girl who thought love meant sacrifice. The girl who thought giving up her family was proof of loyalty. If I could speak to her now, I'd tell her this. Love that costs you everything isn't love. It's a slow kind of death. And so I carry on, one step at a time. Not toward revenge anymore, but toward redemption. Because even if my family never forgives me, even if I never find love again, I want to forgive myself. Not for him, not for them, but for me. Time moved strangely after everything ended. Some days it dragged, suffocating me in silence. Other days it rushed by, leaving me dizzy with the realization that I'd spent another month stuck in the past. But healing is like that. Messy, uneven, never quite linear. I tried to rebuild my life in small ways. I got a new job, nothing glamorous, just enough to keep me afloat. I forced myself to wake up, to go outside, to breathe. And slowly, the panic attacks came less often. The nights weren't so suffocating. But one wound lingered. The absence of my family. Every time my phone lit up, my heart leapt. I hoped it would be them. But it never was. Just bills. Spam messages. The empty kind of noise that fills a life when real voices are missing. And I realized something I hadn't admitted before. Losing him hurt, but losing them hurt worse. I replayed it all in my head 1,000 times. The warnings, the arguments, the moment I chose him over them. And every time I wanted to reach back through the years and shake myself. To scream, "Don't do it. Don't trade blood for a man who doesn't deserve you." But time doesn't work that way. And regret doesn't fix what's already shattered. One evening, months later, I walked past a restaurant I used to go to with my family. Through the window, I saw a family gathered around a table, laughing, talking over each other. The father raised a toast. The mother leaned in, smiling. And for a moment I froze. It wasn't them, of course. But it could have been. Should have been. Tears burned my eyes as I realized. I had chosen love over family. And in the end I lost both. But here's the strange thing about pain. If you let it, it teaches you. Strips away illusions and forces you to face yourself. I thought love was about sacrifice. About proving myself worthy, even at the cost of my own happiness. But now I know, real love doesn't demand that you abandon who you are. It doesn't pit you against the people who raised you. It doesn't thrive on secrecy, manipulation, and control. The love I chose was never love at all. It was obsession. It was power disguised as passion. It was a trap I willingly walked into. Some nights I still dream of him. Not the monster he became, but the man I thought he was. And those are the hardest dreams to wake up from. Because for a few fleeting moments I feel safe again. Happy again. Whole again. And then morning comes, and I remember the truth. But instead of breaking me, those mornings fuel me. They remind me that I survived. That I walked through the fire and came out scarred, yes, but alive. I don't know if my family will ever forgive me. Maybe they'll always see me as the girl who chose wrong. The daughter who turned her back. The sister who disappeared. But I've learned something important. Even if they never open their arms again, I can still choose differently now. I can still be the kind of person who listens, who protects, who refuses to repeat the same mistake. And maybe, one day they'll see that. If I'm honest, revenge wasn't the answer I thought it would be. It gave me a momentary high, a fleeting sense of justice. But it didn't heal me. It didn't restore what I lost. It just left me standing in the wreckage, forced to build from scratch. And maybe that's the real lesson. Revenge doesn't set you free. Forgiveness does. And not forgiveness for them, but forgiveness for yourself. I've started writing letters I never send. Letters to my mother, my father, my siblings. Letters to him. Letters to myself. I pour out the anger, the sorrow, the guilt, and the love that still lingers in pieces. And then I fold them away, as if tucking the pain into a box where it can't control me anymore. It's not perfect. Some days I still ache. Some days I still feel the pull of what I lost. But other days I feel something else. Hope. Hope that maybe one day I'll laugh without the weight of memory. Hope that one day my family might pick up the phone. Hope that even if they don't, I can create a new family. One built on truth, not lies. If you asked me now what I regret most, I'd say this. Not that I loved him. Not even that I took revenge. But that I silenced the people who loved me most in the world. That I let their voices fade until I couldn't hear them anymore. 'Cause they were right. They were always right. And I was too blinded by love to see it. So this is where my story ends. Not with a fairy tale, not with a happy ending. But with a truth that I had to bleed for to understand. Love is not worth losing yourself. Love is not worth losing your family. And if it asks you to choose, it was never love at all. I chose him over my family. And I lost everything. But maybe, just maybe, losing everything was what I needed to finally find myself. If you've listened to my story, I want to hear from you. In just one word, tell me how it made you feel. Was it satisfied? Heartbroken? Or simply empty? Leave that word in the comments below. I'll be reading them all. And if you've ever faced betrayal or found yourself torn between love and family, share your experience. Sometimes telling your story can help someone else who feels completely alone right now. Your voice might make the difference.